Hi everyone, Stephen here and welcome back to Heart of the Matter. Now, character and citizenship education lessons in classes across local schools in Singapore recently came under some scrutiny. The lesson centered around the Israel-Hamas war, which has been raging for slightly over 5 months since October 7 last year. Now, today we're not actually going to talk about the war or about how the Education Ministry approached these lessons, but what we do want to talk about is how we can have conversations to help our children navigate through difficult or contentious issues. In short, how do we engage them in meaningful discussions in an increasingly polarized world? Let's start off first by framing this discussion. I mean, what in your view is considered a difficult topic or discussion to have?
I guess it's important for character and citizenship education when we talk about discussions around contemporary issues. They may not always be sensitive or contentious, right? But the emphasis is really on issues that are authentic and relevant and meaningful to the students. We want them, maybe they're topics that the kids are already talking about. Okay. So then it becomes an opportunity to, within the classroom, to use that as a platform for them to learn how to talk to each other in ways that are respectful, where they get to express different points of view, and then learn how to maybe even agree to disagree. Okay. So that's really the point of these type of conversations. It's not so much about understanding the issue itself, although that's an important part of it, but really more important is the kind of skills we want them to learn, the kind of values we want them to demonstrate.
So it sounds a bit like teaching them how to have these conversations. Yes. Not so much exactly what you're talking about, but how do you approach the issue and how do you deal with it? Because as we grow older, we realize that, there'll be many times when we have discussions and we don't always agree on things with different people, but we can still remain colleagues and friends and look beyond that. So the concern then also being that for many of the younger ones, they might be afraid that if they, step out in the wrong way, they'll be cancelled in this so-called cancel culture, right? Philibert, I mean, at your school, there are a lot of young people. How do you sort of structure and craft these conversations?
So I agree that, young people these days have the fear of being cancelled, right? So I think the purpose of the CC lesson is to, first of all, set the norms for the class, right? So we talk about respect, we talk about empathy, and we talk about, holding that safe space for everyone to just express their views. So once that class norm has been set, I think students feel safe. The CC curriculum and the environment in the school provides that safe space for the students to share their views, whether or not they agree with each other or not. And in this case, this also applies to the teachers. Some teachers will say that, no, I feel a certain way about issue. Some others say, I feel the other way about the issue. So once again, it's up to a school leader like myself to say, okay, I see where you're coming from, but, can we meet in the middle just to have that conversation?
So how do you have that conversation with your teachers? If they say, I strongly feel opposed to this view that the CCA says, then what do you do? So
we remind the teachers, what is the core, what is the main intent of that CC lesson is to help the students, as what Dr. Thavam said, to bring the skills to the fore and bring the discussion about the values to the forefront, right? How do you facilitate the students being in a safe environment to speak their mind? So I think we remind our teachers about that, and we tell our teachers, look, you will not be judged for your personal views, but this is the intent of the lesson. So
can they share their personal views in that situation?
For the teachers?
Yeah.
I think the teachers can say, this is the issue. I may not agree with what's here, but I don't think any teacher would be in any position to push their views to the student. For teachers of older students, they may be more comfortable in sharing it because they understand their students are of a certain maturity level. But for teachers with younger students, in secondary school or lower secondary, I think teachers are also aware that they should focus on the purpose of the lesson, which is to emphasize the skills, emphasize the values that is part of that conversation.
So Annabelle, when we look at this situation, then does the age of the student make a big difference in terms of how such discussions should be held?
Absolutely. So when we have discussions with our students or our children, I think being age appropriate is quite important. So you think about the younger students, you want to make sure that the content is delivered in a more simplified way, or the way that you are practicing active listening, you will intentionally slow the process down more than it would be for an older child. So I think you should still have the conversations. I do have these conversations with my 3-year-old last year, like these difficult conversations, because I have a 6 and a 4. So last year they were 5 and 3. And with things that were happening around the world, I will bring it up because I agree with what both of you have said. It's about active listening. It's about instilling empathy, open-mindedness. It's about how you have the conversation.
Then you are challenging your teachers to distill the information in a way that I guess they deem appropriate, which sometimes may come across as inappropriate. Do you know what I mean? Because you're having to sort of dumb it down. You're summarizing, you're interpreting what's there, and you have your own opinion, biases, which will sometimes kick in, and you may inadvertently say something or teach it in a way that isn't as neutral, so to speak.
The risk is always there. So when we do our workshops with our teachers, very often they do talk about how difficult it might be to actually facilitate a conversation, especially when they have very strong views about it, and maybe it may not be so advisable for them to share their personal views because they do have an influence over the kids, especially if the kids respect them a lot. So we do tell them that you have a responsibility to remember your role as an educator, as a teacher, and you need to also remember that the kids come from very different backgrounds. You have to think about the families that the kids are coming from, and when you share your personal views, if you're going to share your personal views.
Yeah, besides just teaching, it sounds like they have to be a bit of a psychologist as well to understand the room, the whole situation. Teachers, I guess, sometimes are put in a spot. And we did speak to a former ex-JC teacher who wanted to share his view. Khairul Nizam, said about what happens when he feels that kids don't have a safe space to speak about what they are seeing or hearing on social media. Let's just listen in.
If a student brings up a topic, that means it is in their heads. If the education landscape does not offer a platform to discuss, or at least an avenue for them to discuss these topics that's happening in their head, they might be just entrenching their prejudice or their myopic perspective. And then as they go out to the working world, good luck to all of us because they didn't have that outlet or avenue.
So he's saying there's concern that they have this stuck in their heads. And if it aren't given a chance to discuss it, to explore it further, it could result in worse situations further down the road. Education Minister Chan Chun Seng explained that, that we should be talking about these complex issues. But the question is, who is equipped to talk about it? And ideally, should this be done at home, at school? And do we have the right people to do that? Phil, when you approach this issue, do you feel the classroom is the right setting to have such discussions, or should it happen more at home?
I mean, you'll be very surprised at the kinds of conversations that our students have among themselves. So I think in response to what was just played, our students are on TikTok, on social media all the time. And the way that the social media algorithm is, if you spend a certain amount of time on a certain video, the apps do churn out similar videos for the students. So some students may fall into the trap of being in a echo chamber, so to speak. So when they come to school, when they speak to their peers, there is, I would say, there's a reduced power differential when speaking to their peers, because instead of speaking to their parents, it's mommy and daddy telling me that I'm wrong, or mommy and daddy having a different opinion. So they come to school, the norms are set in the classroom. And the students speak with each other. I saw this. I felt very angry about this when I saw it. And then the student says, actually, did you see the other video that was posted, and which shows you a different view of it? So I think just based on this, in informal conversations we observe in school, I think our students do appreciate the safe space that we have in schools to have their conversations.
But it also sounds like the teacher has to be in a bit of the know to know what was the other side of the coin. Because if she didn't have that to share, then How does she contribute to that discussion?
So I think it goes back to the facilitation of the teacher. Things prompts or questions such as So do you think that there's another point of view? Simple questions like this allows for the students to think, pause for a moment, calm themselves down and ask themselves, is this the only narrative that is present in this issue? So I think it's the skill of the teacher comes to the fore to elicit, is there anything else that you have not considered? Or you can throw a question to another friend. Do you agree with your friend who just said this?
Right.
Yeah.
And actually, this is the kind of professional development that we're working on for teachers, where we try to help them think about the questions that you ask rather than the answers. So we get them to practice asking questions, and this actually starts from we've just recently introduced a program at the National Institute of Education for beginning teachers, for student teachers, a module on character and citizenship education and the need to facilitate discussions such as these in class. And then we follow through with training for our teachers in school. And then we also have people whom we've nominated as specialized CCE teachers. And these folks get additional professional development opportunities.
Okay.
So it's a journey that we've been on only maybe for about a few years now. And it'll take some time, I think.
Because what we're saying here is that teachers don't necessarily need to have all the answers, right? But of course, that is something that we're not very used to here in Singapore society. And maybe, Annabelle, as a parent, would you be okay with having such discussions where your kids come home and say, we talked about this, but at the end of the day, I still don't know what's going on?
Absolutely. And I think it's quite important to recognize that everyone has a shared responsibility in this. I think there's a lot of pressure on teachers to be the ones who handle these conversations and to manage the students' perspective or to offer them direction. And that's the skill that we want our students to actually develop, because you need Socratic questioning for your work next time to get curious and to improve and deepen understanding of the subject matter. In the same vein, if we can do that at home and say, if my child comes home and say, this discussion happened and I don't agree with it, I would actually want to get curious about how the discussion was held, and if there were opposing views, how was that dealt with? I think that's more important to me as a parent than the actual content being delivered.
But do parents know this? So when you're planning your syllabus, do you expect that parents will sort of continue that conversation back home?
At the primary school level, in our CCE lessons, we actually have I don't know whether your kids have come to you with family time. We have a section in the lesson plan where the kid actually goes and talks to their parents about what they discussed in class, and then there's some sort of activity with the parents. So this happens at primary level. And this is for our regular CCE lessons, both in the mother tongue as well as during what we call our form teacher guidance period, which is in English. Yeah, so that's the kind of engagement at this point in time. Maybe the conversation on this particular issue, I suppose, because the focus of the lesson was really on talking about emotions and sharing what they heard and what they felt at the primary level, and not so much on the issue itself, it was really in the hands of the teacher to manage that at the primary school.
So are our teachers well equipped enough to handle these situations? Are they ready for it yet?
I guess it's something we got to keep working on,
Yeah, because I got to admit, even as an adult and even at university, when you have these conversations, it's difficult. Even now when we, so to expect younger kids and teachers who may not be as experienced is also quite a lot to ask from them. The generation also looks at social media for information, not just entertainment. So Phil, you mentioned earlier how the algorithms feed them, more of the same. They're in echo chambers. What do you think a good classroom discussion can achieve that these social media bubbles cannot?
Well, I think I give you an example. I think alluding to what Dr. Thavam said about the training that our teachers get, pre-service, and I sat into the lesson of a very young teacher, so less than a year in service. So that means she underwent this particular training, and in this issue, she said she asked the students, how many of you believe that this situation was caused, or you can trace this situation back to a certain date? And then maybe a few students raised their hands. And then she followed up the question, how many of you did not hear about this situation before this date? Some hands went up. And then she asked a few more questions to just basically get the class to understand where each of them stood.
Yep.
Right? And I thought that was a beautiful start to the conversation, because the kids, they do not assume that they are entering the discussion, as a monolith, that they all believe the same thing. Visually, it was very clear that, my friends believe different things from me.
Right.
And then that was a beautiful start to the conversation where the teacher could then, okay, let's see. There's so many views, so many different views. Okay, let's start from what's our common ground. So I thought that's a very good example of, what a good discussion would be.
But do all teachers know how to do that?
I think it varies, and I think increasingly our teachers are getting comfortable with that conversation.
The landscape is very uneven, for sure.
Yeah.
But we have to start somewhere, and I think that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, and that's why we're having these conversations, these also difficult conversations here in this room. But I just want to bring you back to our ex-JC teacher again, because he did share a bit of information about, again, how key a facilitator is in such discussions. Let's listen in.
Successful classrooms will have a very good facilitator. A weaker classroom where I think students who are unable to articulate and teachers who are not sensitive in able to draw out or able to facilitate different perspective might have challenges. Because I know some colleagues who will have challenge with their classes. Some of them really just a civics tutor, come in, don't check in with the students, and they just deliver the lesson.
I'm sure your teachers will tell you that, Phil. It's like, I have so many things to do already. Now you want me to do this too? You know what I mean? They will need to go and see the psychologist after that. They'll be stressed,
Teachers actually form a big part of my clinical.
Oh no. That is not a good sign, But yeah, I mean, to be fair, it does feel like a bit of an added burden. And yeah, they're there to teach. They're not really trained as counselors or psychologists. So is it fair to expect that from them? And to then say when these discussions go wrong, to say, hey, you guys could have done better.
No, I don't think we say that. We don't expect all conversations to go very well. In fact, we often tell our teachers it's okay if mistakes happen. Actually we learn from things that don't go well as well, right? So we can't expect people to be experts overnight.
But are the parents going to be happy with that? You say, it's okay, go ahead, make mistakes. I don't think parents will be too happy to...
In these kind of conversations, I think you cannot expect perfection, right? People are going to maybe say things that might not be appropriate, or deemed appropriate by parents or even by the students for that matter. Because the teacher must be comfortable, right?
Yeah, but I'm not sure there is perfection.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
it's an open conversation, right? Everybody comes from different backgrounds, different experiences. You're going to have different subjective experiences and perspectives about it. And I think it is also an opportunity for parents to also engage in Socratic questioning and also engage in a bit more curiosity as to... And also to highlight to their children that there's no such thing as perfection in that sense. And maybe, yes, your teacher may have said that. How did that make you feel? And actually use that as a springboard to explore emotions and empathy and active listening.
Yeah, I was going to say also, sometimes the most disastrous of conversations have the best lessons. Because, in the aftermath, you calm everybody down and then you hear the students' voices. Actually, Mr. Leow, so-and-so said something, but actually we all disagreed. We told him, it was wrong and so on and so forth. So I think we do not ask for perfection from our teachers. Right? Even there was a mistake in the classroom, if there's something that was said wrongly in the wrong manner, we say it's okay. Right, and then there are opportunities for them to correct themselves, and there are also opportunities for them to do an after action, a review with the class. Like class, we said this, this resulted in some disagreement. Somebody, what can we learn?
Can I add to that?
Yep.
Because I'm just wondering, actually, isn't that the heart of CCE lesson, like being civil, being open-minded, developing empathy, kindness, grace.
But let me ask you, do you think all parents would feel the same way?
And
are they mature enough to accept, in that sense, these conversations that happen? We must remember that Singaporeans were across all demographics.
Yeah.
everybody will approach this differently, right?
Absolutely. And I think maybe to kind of fill that gap, it's parent education. Because I think a lot of pressure is placed on the teachers to educate our kids, and they come home and that's it, right? Do the homework, go to school. But teachers now have a lot of pressure to be able to pick up mental health conditions, basic counseling, CC, how to do Socratic questioning. But if we can start to educate parents during orientation and even ongoing conversations, that it's actually shared responsibility.
Right. So maybe even before it happens in school, so that when the kid comes home and says, "Hey, mommy, we talked about this," the parent will know what to say, right? Is that a fair request?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Because we see CCE not just a subject during the curriculum, but more like a whole school approach. So it's not just what happens in the classroom, but also what happens beyond the classroom during their CCAs, during their values in action.
But that's a whole lot, right? Okay, all I'm saying is, I think as a parent, I wouldn't mind a heads up so that I can better respond to my child's questions when they come home. Yeah. And I think that's a fair request.
I think it's fair, yes.
Yeah.
And I think that actually brings up the important point of regular communication between parent and teacher, right? Because we want to close the gap and help our child, the student.
Because we always say, right, the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah.
So
in a way, we don't want, because you want the parents to be involved in the process as well, right? So I think the only way is to have them understand what is going on in the school so that they can also follow up with other parts of the discussion as and when is needed. So how can we move forward from here? Because there will always be times when difficult issues, sensitive topics need to be addressed and spoken about. And is the school the right place to do it? And if so, how can we do it better? And what are some of the things that you think we might need to make this a more approachable conversation all around?
Maybe one thing is for everyone to see, especially the adults in the school, to see themselves as being role models for students. So even when they ask questions, when they facilitate a conversation, they are demonstrating to students how you would engage in such a conversation. And even among the staff, right? For teachers, the way they communicate with each other as well.
Right.
This would be an example for the students.
Okay.
So we could work towards that, I suppose.
Well, I would think that besides having sufficient knowledge of the subject matter, it is also actually about being acutely aware of how we feel about it. And if necessary, I think we need to regulate how we feel before we actually engage in conversations.
Actually, I just wanted to add on to that. To acknowledge the emotional aspect of conversations like this.
Right.
It's not just a cognitive, intellectual conversation, but it's a conversation that also we need to hear stories, we need to hear experiences, we need to hear how people are feeling, right? And that's where the empathy building comes in. You know, when you hear the perspective of another, you're not just listening with your head, but you're also listening with your heart.
That's right.
So that's what we try. We're trying to work towards that, actually. That sort of mindset in our students and teachers.
If you look at this, what has transpired very positively, it has brought CCE to the fore. And I think it's a good thing because everybody looks at English, Math, Science, and nobody spends a lot of time. You know what CCE? You know what? Before this, we were
just
talking.
throw in an exam for CCE, and then things will change.
But I think parents, this has brought CCE to the front, and I think it's a good time for our parents to appreciate the work that's being done in school. That their children, whether or not they like it or not, their children are being exposed to views online. Their children are struggling with some of these views online, and some of them looking for space to talk about these views that they talk online. And I think schools will continue to provide that safe space for the children to speak their mind, to emote, to practice empathy, right? And parents, if you would like to be part of that conversation, please, of course, I think all teachers, schools would appreciate the constructive partnership with parents to, have that conversation at home, in school, and even beyond, so that we can help every child be mature, every child to have the skill set, to take along, after school and after they graduate.
Character and citizenship education. We say CCE and then everybody thinks they know what it's about. It's about developing character. It's about helping children learn the values so that they can function in society well. It's about developing social emotional well-being as well, learning how to name their emotions, learning how to regulate their emotions, and it's also about active citizenship. Learning the skills of civic discourse, understanding how to live in a society. So those types of things as well, which
Yeah, and that actually is very difficult to teach.
Yeah.
Right? These are soft skills that it's not like math, you count 1 to 10, I mean, and it'll be different for each and every one of us. As we've all mentioned, these conversations will happen again, and it does take two to tango. I think the schools have a part to play, but parents need to also be open to having discussions with their children and knowing that there doesn't need to be a definitive answer. We are all entitled to our own different opinions, but whether we are there yet in terms of maturity, experience, I think it's still a work in progress. On that note, if you have views on this issue, please drop us a note. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us on all the usual podcast channels, or you can find me on social media as well, and we do love to hear from you. Thanks to the CNA podcast team. They are Tiffany Ang, Junaini Johari, Sayawin, Joanne Chan, and Crispina Robert. And I'm Stephen Chia, saying bye for now.